Look at these satellite images of a very specific place in the Saudi Arabian desert. As you can see, it's a full-blown construction zone, and they are building possibly one of the dumbest things I can think of: a linear city in the desert. Now, you might assume the stupidity lies in the shape of the city alone, and while the shape is dumb, you'll soon see that it's hardly the worst part about this project. So, this project, called NEOM, is a mega project Saudi Arabia is ready to spend $500 billion on. The only problem is, it won't work, at least not as they intended to. See, the city's insane design relies on cutting-edge technology that no one has ever used or even seen before. Apparently, this completely new city will feature things like nature reserves and a super fast and efficient transportation system, all within a straight, mirrored glass line spanning 170 kilometers of desert. What's crazy is that NEOM is just one of the 9 megacity projects planned near the western coast of the country. These massive projects aim to radically transform the country and embark the kingdom on a new era of modernization, business, and development. According to conservative estimates, NEOM on its own will cost the Saudi government nearly half of the total $1 trillion infrastructure project. So why spend so much money to build a megacity in the desert? Well, you see, the goal of the Saudi 2030 projects is to attract investment and tourists from abroad. And you'll soon see why this is much harder than they expect it to be. But I'll reveal one of them now. As Saudi Arabia has a very low English proficiency, one of the lowest in the world in fact. So either the Saudis will have to learn English or the tourists will need to learn a bit of Arabic, which is problematic unless they of course use Speakly. Speakly is really cool because they spend years researching thousands of language learners and created a unique method that teaches words and sentences based on their relevance in real-life situations. This means that you don't learn anything that you can't use to speak the language. Based on research, this Speakly methodology helps you learn languages 5 times faster compared to what you're accustomed to, which gets you from 0 to solid speaking skills in around 3 to 4 months with only 30 minutes of daily learning practice. Speakly offers everything you need to learn a new language, as you'll learn new vocabulary, have speaking and writing exercises, listening comprehension exercises, and even music recommendations in the language that you're learning. This means that your studies never get boring and monotonous. Also, Speakly recently launched brand new mobile apps, which are much improved and include, among other things, a brand new review system which gives you an overview of how well you know certain words and sentences, and also lets you review sentences on the go, with a hands-free mode making learning convenient during busy days. Speakly is available on both web and mobile, so click the link below and start learning some cool new languages today. Thank you to Speakly for sponsoring this video. Alright, so the reason Saudi Arabia is so desperate for foreign investment is pretty simple. The country will go bankrupt if they fail to change. See, right now, oil is the primary source of revenue driving their economy, and it's the reason they became so rich in the first place. But with major economies like China, Europe, and the US pushing for electric cars, Saudi Arabia needs to find a new source of revenue before the world stops buying petrol. On top of this, we are currently developing biodegradable plastics with the potential to replace oil-based plastics altogether in the near future. So they've come up with the brilliant solution of spending a ridiculous amount of this black gold on flashy mega projects to attract foreign investment, talent, and tourists to the country. But while flashy infrastructure projects may make headlines, they're not enough on their own to attract money from abroad. See, a country needs a few crucial ingredients in order to attract a lot of foreign investors. These are things like political stability, infrastructure, government flexibility, and a highly skilled workforce. Saudi Arabia does have some of these qualities, but there's too much focus on these mega projects and not enough on the other crucial ingredients of success. What's amazing is how far the country has come over the past century, which is something I have to give the country credit for. Before the discovery of oil, the country had little industry. It was a tribal society with shepherds and merchants being the main occupations. After the discovery of oil, the country solely focused on its petroleum industry, creating businesses and industries like plastics, petrochemicals, and natural gas. This made their economy dependent on one industry, making it a lot more unstable and in the long term unsustainable. Today, petroleum accounts accounts for a staggering 42% of the country's GDP and 90% of what it earns from exports. And this fact is what Saudi Arabia is looking to change with foreign investment before it's too late. In fact, experts from Brookings and the World Bank predict that by 2034, Saudi Arabia will deplete their wealth reserves unless they can pull off meaningful economic and fiscal reform. Despite the promises of shiny megaprojects, reality is staring Saudi Arabia dead in the face. Economic researchers have recommended that the government focuses on more productive projects that actually guarantee and promote economic growth instead of what they've been doing so far. But there's a major barrier in the way of making these badly needed changes: the Saudi elite's oil-funded extravagant lifestyle. See, thanks to their massive oil revenue, Saudi Arabia gives every citizen a huge discount on petrol, income tax, and limits taxes on products. While they've tried to end this unsustainable practice, the Saudi government has been forced to backtrack multiple times to avoid public backlash or even unrest. But these megacity projects just aren't the solution to the country's economic problems. Take NEOM, for example. What logical reason is there to build a linear city? Building these enormous walls will require an absurd amount of energy, resources, and innovative technology that has yet to be implemented on a massive scale. The city's urban design is unlike any other city and will require untested solutions to function. The most viable infrastructure in development that resembles to what the city is trying to recreate is the Hyperloop train, but it's still nowhere near ready for mass transportation access. And this is just one of the many projects NEOM and the line are trying to reimagine and develop within the same city. Other projects like water recycling and desalination are also ongoing, which we already know how to do, just not really at that scale. When you consider how much money is required to fund the research for these radical technologies, it makes you wonder if it's really justified. And this doesn't even consider the cost of maintaining the structure's integrity over the coming decades. On top of that, the line's construction alone is estimated to produce at least 1.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide, or the equivalent of over 4 years of the UK's emissions. When your project is competing with a major industrialized country for emissions, something is seriously wrong, especially when you're branding this project as carbon neutral. Well, of course it won't be carbon neutral because look at all this carbon they used. It doesn't make sense. And the negative environmental impacts of the project is starting to generate the wrong kind of publicity abroad. The famous postmodernist architect Gian Piero Frasinello has compared the project to seeing the dystopias of your own imagination being created. And this negative attention doesn't help a project hoping to attract foreign investment and improve Saudi Arabia's economic prospects. Adding to the doubts about the project's potential is a tendency in Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries to leave projects unfinished. If we zoom out for a moment to look at all the Gulf states, you can see how many projects have either stalled or been completely abandoned. These projects failed for a host of reasons, from lack of communication to constant cost overruns. According to global data, the Middle East and the Gulf region ranked second to last in the likelihood that infrastructure projects would reach completion. The situation is so bad, in fact, that an estimated 23% of all public-private partnership projects are abandoned in the Middle East, which is absolutely insane. Considering the region's track record, these megaprojects seem more like products of autocratic power structures than a logical attempt at attracting investment. And the thing is, NEOM is just the most recent example in Saudi Arabia. Go back a few years and it's not hard to find a failed megaproject. After the success of the Burj Khalifa in the neighboring UAE, Saudi Arabia announced it would build even higher. The Jeddah Tower was planned to be the first skyscraper to reach 1,000 meters. The kilometer-long skyscraper project was abandoned for two reasons. First, the tower pushed the boundaries of modern technology by trying to use concrete as high up as possible without using steel members. Sound familiar? And more importantly, the project's main financial backer, Al-Walid bin Talal, was arrested alongside 11 Saudi princes in an anti-corruption campaign. What's shocking is that the Jeddah Tower project was expected to cost just $1.2 billion, which sounds completely reasonable compared to the line's $1 trillion price tag, yet they couldn't finish it. But honestly, the failed megaprojects isn't even the biggest reason Saudi Arabia has a hard time attracting foreign investors. See, behind the shiny modern outer veneer of these super projects, the country is still largely unchanged. It still has a strict Sharia legal system. Now, sure, on the surface, it's going in the right direction. In recent years, the country's leader has touted new freedoms for Saudis, earning the country good press in the West. Just 5 years ago, women weren't allowed to drive in the kingdom, restaurants had to be gender segregated, and movie theaters and concerts were completely forbidden. Now, all of that has changed, but these changes are mainly cosmetic and do little to change the country's foundations and deeply rooted culture. Human rights and labor rights are other areas where the country has a bad track record, and NEOM and the line haven't exactly made this any better. This is the village of Al-Khayaba, where an activist, Abdul Rahim Al-Hawati, vowed to defy the government's eviction order to highlight how the Saudi government forced his tribe to move from their historic homeland. But before he could make this happen, he was killed by Saudi forces. This is just one of many examples that human rights activists, lawyers, and governments are investigating. As recently as May 2023, the UN expressed alarm at the number of imminent executions linked to the NEOM project. These human rights violations are horrible on their own, but to make things worse, the project claims to be built for better humans and a better society. Given the reality on the ground, the irony of these statements does little to sway foreign investors that the country has truly changed. When you compare Saudi Arabia to neighbors like the UAE, the difference is completely clear. The UAE is more tolerant of other religions and foreign customs. On top of this, expats and foreign investors can have full ownership of companies in free trade zones, making projects, investments, companies, and the movement of people easier. These projects actually attract the tourists, talent, investors, and businesses that Saudi Arabia is looking for. Instead of making these major social changes and modest infrastructure projects, the Saudi kingdom is committed to impossible goals. It is building these megacity projects with the intention of attracting 100 million annual visitors by 2030. To put that goal into perspective, the United States currently has around 80 million visitors yearly. So this is not gonna happen. The Saudi tourist sector is still tiny and lacks the infrastructure, jobs, services, transportation, and accommodations to handle such a mass influx of tourists. From any angle, the government's strategy to build megastructures to attract massive numbers of tourists overnight seems unwise. Considering these highly complicated structures may never be built in the first place, and projects like NEOM seem more like another problem than a solution, to put it simply, the project's goals are delusional, and it's sad because the country has so much potential. It already has one of the best universities in the Gulf region, giving the country potential to become a true knowledge-based economy. But for that to happen, the country cannot sit on the fence between its old and new values. Instead of overly ambitious mega projects, the country should focus on smaller, more boring projects that actually have the potential to improve things. The point of this video, though, is not to say whether the line will be built or not, or whether Saudi Arabia's social reforms will succeed. It's to show the clear weaknesses in their plan going forward so they can hopefully improve it and make lasting changes that will change the country for the better. But what do you think? Can they accomplish these goals? And are these mega projects the right way to do that? Well, that's for you to decide, but that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.